This is the old Jeep that I'm going to convert to Barra powered with auto. Just to give you a bit of comparison with a few of the figures, these weigh around 1500 kilos as opposed to the Territory, which is up around 2 tonne. The Barra motor NA was around 150, I think 153 kilowatts, which is a bit over 200 horsepower, which I think the Jeep 4 litre was very close, or similar sort of power output, which might get a few of you asking why bother changing to a Ford Barra transmission and engine. A lot of Aussies would know the reason for that would be the potential within the Barra. NA, yeah, they're very similar, but when you turn around and you look at it in respects to boosted, completely different animal. Our engine mounts are in. We utilise basically the original Jeep Cherokee mount with some fabricated RHS and some other material to basically mount the Barra to tie it all into using the original mounting points on the chassis that Jeep intended their engines to be mounted to. What else can I tell you about it? It's very difficult because obviously the project's still ongoing. All the wiring loom that's still existing from the diesel is still in place. All the wiring loom for the Barra is still there, so it's just a bit of a shit show going on. The AC has to come out, the diesel lines have to come out, fuel lines have to go in for the Barra. What else? The FG sump has given us plenty of clearance, nothing hits. We might have to do a little bit of modification to the sump. I'll just leave it for the next week or so and see how it settles down in respect to the clearance between the diff housing and the actual bottom of the sump. But if we do need to modify it, it's not going to be that big a deal. Only probably needs about an inch taken out of it, and that'll give it enough clearance to miss the housing. But we just got to wait for the weight of the car to settle the suspension down and take a couple more measurements from there. I'll try and climb in under the car to sort of show you, but I think it's a bit pointless. You can take my word that the transmission is hooked up. Still need to get the tail shafts made, but we can't do any of that until the cross members made for the transmission and everything can then be measured properly For those that are really concerned about the diff that we're running in the Jeep Cherokee, yeah, I'm pretty much aware that they're shit, and I'm really quite aware that the axles aren't the best either. But we're on top of that. We're researching a couple of diff conversions to go in the back of it, so hopefully that'll give us a stronger diff. And the Territory has a ratio of, I think, 68 to 32 with its power transfer. So 32% of the power goes to the front, 68 to the rear. So we'll definitely should get away with having the original diff with a few modifications up front. Obviously down back we're going to definitely try and have to find something a little bit tougher to cope with the torque that the engine will eventually produce. Strength is lost out of the bonnet, and I'm not going to pass the car with a hole in the bonnet and a reverse cowl. So I've been thinking of how to get around it, and I said to him, if I create something out of steel, a hump, and retain the strength of the bonnet, will you be happy with that? He said yes. So this is what we've come up with. Now, when I had the bulge put into the bonnet and I fabricated it, everything closed 100%. It was perfect. And this is where the problem arose. I spoke to the engineer, sent him a photo, he's happy with what it is, then he turned around and he said, you need to put bracing into the bonnet. Now I can't close the bonnet. And when I say bracing, this is what my guy wants. Doesn't mean it's what you guys need to do, but this is what I've done. So I'll open the bonnet and then I'll show you what I've done. So being a 2000 Jeep, it means that the Australian design rules or regulations, there is some sort of frontal impact regulations that this vehicle must comply with. And it means that the bracing here that we cut out, we've had to reinstate and recreate the crumple zone. So that's a factory crumple zones down through there. They're designed to absorb impact as if you had a frontal collision, and in order to absorb all the energy of that collision, they basically are designed to fold. So we've had to recreate all this steel here and here, and then we've had to then notch everything so that basically the bonnet will fold the same way as it would factory, or a similar way to what it would do in factory, but give all the strength back to the bonnet that it originally needed. After I've finished talking, I'll throw up a photo of what the original bonnet is. It's what they call a peace sign. It's basically, it comes into the middle with a Y, and then it goes up to the front to support that area there. The concern was the support around the latch, but being a Jeep, the latches are on the side, so we haven't altered any of that. That's only just a safety latch for if the locking mechanisms fail, then obviously it's going to catch on that before it flips up and smashes out your windscreen. So this is the way that I've done it, not the way that is necessarily going to be the way that your engineer wants it done or anything like that. But, you know, as I said before, this is the way that I do things, not necessarily the way that you're going to do things if you're going to do your conversion. And probably would suggest that the majority of people won't even bother getting an engineer. They'll just do what every other car does and just throw one in and not bother with it. Now, normally I wouldn't bother with it, but my wife's going to be driving the car and the kids are going to be in it, so we're doing things properly this time. What we'll do is, there's been a little bit of feedback in regards to where I've set the Barra. People are under the impression that, yeah, that this engine could go back further. No, what you're not actually considering is it can't go back further, because there's your water outlets. That's your inlet manifold, and behind there you got a cam sensor. So if you want to cut the firewall and recess it back, and I don't know what you're going to do with your heater core and push all that shit back, that could be one option. But I'm telling you right now, in this car as it sits with this suspension and the way it's set up, there is no way knowing I can lower the motor any further down, and setting it back and cutting the back of the firewall would create more issues with the engineering than what it's worth. And to top it off, that 50 mil that you're only basically getting from 3/4 of the rocker cover over here back, that offset down there is not going to get you to drop your motor any further. And I've been jumping on the internet and I've been reading everyone's comments and I've been getting back under the car, and to be quite honest guys, this is the best scenario that I can come up with. Alrighty, so here's our radiator. I'll throw it in and we'll see how it looks. Right. So fits with no problems. Basically all I've got to do is where are we? Pull these brackets off the off this old radiator here, that one and that one, and reinstate them so that basically they go in under there and stop the radiator flopping around like a cock in a sock. And yeah, I think we're going to be good to go. The outlets are obviously, being for the 4 litre, are going to be a bit different, so we're now going to have to go from the bottom up to the top, but that's not a big deal. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go take this to a mate of mine and get him to knock the filler neck off it and weld it up, because there's no point having a filler neck that's lower than the highest point, which is going to be this thermostat housing here. My intention is to run the original Jeep what do they call it, the reservoir over here, and fill the system that way, and then that way the recirculating pipe can go back around and head back over to the other side wherever the tank's located. I can see it, it's amongst a pile of shit sitting on the floor, so I'm not going to drag it out just yet to show you guys, but you'll see it as I do it. So here's my FG turbo manifold that's just arrived, courtesy of, once again, eBay. Thank you. Now at the moment these things are pulling in stupid prices. You can see listings on eBay for $650 for a bare manifold. Don't get caught out. You're better off buying second hand and getting a complete manifold like this with injectors. By the time you turn around and purchase your throttle body, your fuel rail, injectors and everything else like that, it's going to work out more expensive than it is to buy a second hand unit. So if you hang tight and look out, you'll find that there are some good deals. I picked this up for around $500 as it is, from a wrecker in New South Wales, and I had it freighted down. Now the thing about it is you can't use anything off your manifold on it. So your throttle body is, I believe, a different bolt pattern, so it's not necessarily going to bolt to the FG manifold. You can't utilise your fuel rail. Literally anything on this whole system here is now just in the bin. But the intention, as I said before, was that we're always going to go turbo, and we needed to go in a direction that was going to allow us to have more clearance up the back here for these water pipes. So you know, you can, it's difficult, you can sort of see there is a bit of clearance there, but you're going to really, it's not going to be a neat system. And at the end of the day, these NA manifolds with their dual runners are not the ideal setup. So with the FG manifold, you can see that we have heaps more clearance. No longer is there going to be a bonnet issue. My water outlets for the heater hose, that's what I was telling everyone about. You need to be able to have access, and that's the thing. Like, you could probably set the motor back a little bit further, but you're going to have to modify the firewall down near the transmission tunnel. The shape of the bow housing to suit the BDR doesn't particularly favour the Jeep's transmission tunnel shape. So, as I said before, this is the best scenario I could come up with positioning of the engine. You can see also that the fuel rail, everything else like that is easily accessible. The other thing too is, if you're going to be trying to set your motor back, don't forget you've got a temp sensor right at the very back of the block, and if that ever fails, you need to be able to get to it. So as it is now, I can access my bell housing bolts, that temp sensor, that cam sensor that's in behind the fuel reg there. I can access everything, and yeah, I prefer to have easy access as to try to make or gain a little bit of extra space up here, which is pretty negligible in the sense of things of making it all work. We've got our turbo manifold on there. We're going to have an issue obviously with the positioning. It doesn't favour the steering column that comes out, and it doesn't suit the Jeep's location of its what do you call it, engine mounts. So yeah, so we're going to have to try and make something to come out and move the turbo further away. I need to speak to the engineer and see whether he's going to crack the shits at us making a sort of like a J-pipe scenario. My understanding is the motor is to remain stock with the use of factory parts. That's the reason why I can get away with the FG manifold as opposed to using an aftermarket Plemium, which you could use an aftermarket Plemium if you wanted to, but my engineer said that he wanted to see factory stuff, which basically meant that I couldn't modify the original NA manifold. And to make things even worse, I've now got to try and fit into this area here a BA airbox into an XG engine bay. So that's the next problem that we've got to sort of try and work our way around, but otherwise I'm really happy with how it's all starting to look. Taking the manifold off the motor has given me an insight into how shit this thing is. So for the purpose of just getting the car on the road, this motor is what I'm going to use, but I'm definitely going to have to build a new motor. The full machining process, but I threw the exhaust manifold in the milling machine, and I've reduced the thickness of the flange, and also I've put it's about a 3-degree taper on there in order to try and kick the turbo out and give it a little bit more clearance from the steering column and get it up a little bit closer and higher to just give us a bit more clearance. I also didn't film, unfortunately. This is our steering box down here. It also has been modified to give us a bit more clearance, so I've changed the pitch it goes up into towards the firewall, and I won't know how successful it is until the new turbo comes. So obviously we're going to go with a similar style factory turbo, which would be a GT 3582, which is a slightly bigger rear housing. I think that there was a smaller turbo in the first BA series. I think the GT 3582 is something similar to what the FGs run. In saying that, I'm waiting for all the parts to come from Ford Performance Salvage. I'm going to give them another plug because, as I said, these guys have really helped me out. So if you need anything, give them look them up on Facebook, and definitely get in contact with them because they certainly go out of their way in giving you a top-notch service. So I'm basically waiting for heat shields. Everything's got to go back to factory pretty much. It's just got to look like a factory, even though it's a BA motor, we're going to call it a factory FG. So internally it's not going to be an FG, but externally it's going to look like an FG because basically he's also had a nanny fit over the FG manifold. So in order to try and make everything tick the boxes, we're just going to say it's an FG motor. So I've got to run an FG crossover pipe, and I've then got to turn around and basically try and retain the internal diameter down to the turbo and get all that to fix and fit under the Jeep's bonnet. So yeah, so what I'll do now is, instead of explaining each individual part, I don't think there's a need to it. I'm going to go to one of my famous time lapses, and you can see me throw all this shit together.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're worth my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains at last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah. Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help. I had to do it all myself. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Gonna learn the consequence of being incompetent. Mental health is confidence, dreams and some honestness. I'm not here to save the day, that's for you to take away. I could play a million mind games, but instead I say something not illogical, something that is topical. Rub it on and watch it go, make yourself unstoppable. Dreams are irresponsible, but they're always...
So there it is, guys. I'm really digging the way this looks. It's a tight squeeze. The engine bay in here is a lot tighter than what a Falcon is. We've been able to make the airbox fit. One of the requirements was the factory airbox had to be used. That was simply a matter of getting the heat gun, applying a shitload of heat to the inside edge of the airbox, and by applying pressure and pushing down on it, it conformed to the inner wheel arch of the Jeep. So by doing that, we've gained over an inch or over 25 mil of clearance between the bonnet, which has allowed us to push that air filter assembly further back, giving us a little bit more clearance down the front. It is tight. It's going to be interesting how tight it is once the radiator comes back. I've got the FG crossover, and I've used silicon bends down to the turbo because it's the only way that I could really get it to fit, because obviously this motor didn't come out of this car. So we've retained the inner dimensions, so we're running a 102mm or a 4-inch pipe all the way down to 3-inch to the inlet of the turbo, and basically inside the silicon itself I've cut little pieces of piping to stop the silicon from under boost basically collapsing on itself. So I don't know if I demonstrate. You can probably see here there's a bit of movement, but there's nothing there right in the middle because we have a brace in here. So on the bends there's braces, they can't move. There's no 09, it's going to get sucked down into the turbo, so settle down, don't bash the keyboard just yet. Same thing with our pipe here. We've basically put a nice 4-inch bit of pipe in here to reduce any chance of anything collapsing, and yeah, that's the way I've done it. And to be honest, it's the only way that we've been able to make everything conform. So pretty much we've now got the factory dump pipe. We've got a GT3582 on there, and we're running the factory oil pump. I need to custom make my water pipes to the heater over there. And as I was saying to a lot of people before, that this FG manifold has given me a lot more clearance, and that was one of the reasons why I was using an FG manifold, is I need the clearance as opposed to the NA inlet manifold. What else have we done? We've got to turn around and create a bracket. I've had a look, and there is no brackets to relocate because the alternator was down the bottom down there, and it fouls and hits the steering box. So I've got to create a bracket and some way to get the whole pulley system and everything working. So that's the next thing on the agenda. I'm happy with the way everything looks in this motor. The motor has to come out. This is only a trial fit because we've got to do some work on the sump. I've got to machine it for the return, which that's now in place. So I've had a bit of a crazy day on the mill and the lathe. Oh shit, there goes the camera. Bear with us. Anyhow, so I've made this little bracket up. It's going to make more sense when I mount it up. But basically it's a bush here. It's been pressed in. I'm going to put a little weld on the back of it, but that's going to hold my idler pulley, and this will go where the alternator was. So I've machined that. I've machined up some pretty little spaces here, and then I've machined up, oh shit, there goes the camera again, and machined up a few more little spaces. And I've made a bracket that is now mounted to the alternator, which I'll pick up, and I've painted it a nice pretty black, and it'll make sense when I put it all together. Then I'll explain what it does. I'm getting pretty good at knocking the camera today. So this is the alternator. You can see the bracket. It's been made roughly there. So you guys can have a look. There's shit dropping everywhere. But in a nutshell, yeah, we're going to fit it up, and then I'll explain exactly 100% what I've done. For some of you gurus out there, you should be able to copy what I've been able to do. It's not rocket science, it just takes a bit of thought. And the only thing I can suggest is buy yourself a decent 1 meter ruler and use the existing pulleys on the motor for reference, and do your measurements and make sure your measurements are precise, because if they're not precise, then you're going to end up throwing a belt. And that's my biggest fear at the moment, is if I throw a belt, it's going to grenade the radiator at the same time, because there's absolutely bugger all clearance between the two. down, because there's very minimal amount of clearance with that idler pulley there. And the reason I chose this setup is it pretty much retains the factory tensioner. The amount of surface area on that pulley, which is your water pump there, is exactly the same as the factory. So this in theory should operate the same as the factory. So we've got the bracket down here. The back of the alternator, you can't sort of see it, but there's another supporting bracket that comes off the back of the alternator to the block. There is those smaller bushes in between the bracket. That's basically to get the correct alignment between your pulleys, and as I said, running a straight edge across your pulleys will determine the position of your alternator. And it's the same thing down here. We had to create some bushes. We're using the original factory mounts, but I don't know if I can get in there close enough, but you can sort of see that's one of our bushes that we machined up. There's another one down there. That's so that when we clamp everything together, there's something nice and rigid for this plate to bolt to. The amount of stress that's on this plate is very minimal. It's constantly in tension. It's not going to be an issue as far as I can see. It's retaining the factory alternator bracket that was there. So realistically, it's not going to be applying any more forces to that area of the motor and those bolts than it would normally see. In retrospect, it was difficult to try and determine how I was going to mount everything, but like a lot of projects, if you're the first one doing it, you're leading the way for everyone else. I'm sure someone else will come up with a better way. They might even knock out that pulley and drop the motor further down and run a high mount alternator, which I thought of running a high mount alternator, but then the width of the alternator is actually bigger, so then it impacts on the intake of the turbo. So that's why I didn't bother with a high mount alternator conversion and get rid of the power steering and just run an electric power steering pump instead. So that was my reasoning behind that. So now the only thing I've got to do is wait for the radiator, and then we can fit that and see how everything looks. Okay guys, so in reality that's a couple of seconds for you. For me that was a week and a half. So I've been waiting for my radiator to turn up, and it's finally been finished. So originally I had the radiator modified, and I posted up where it needed to be changed again. Now someone turned around and early on in the piece said you need to think outside the box, stand back, look at your radiator, get a bit more clarity, and yeah, nothing happened. So I stood back, I looked at the radiator, I tuned in, and yeah, I just did it the way that I thought I was going to do it. So I'm going to show you how it's been done. And yeah, I don't know, to be quite honest, what was actually wrong with what I was proposing. But yeah, someone didn't like it, but this is what I've done. So our radiator's in place, and I had the outlet shifted from the bottom to the top. Now, as I said before, someone was on one of the comments wasn't really happy with me moving that up higher and told me to rethink. I don't know whether that particular person thought that we were running the oil cooler for the transmission in the header there. If you go back to the videos, as I said, this header was chopped off, the transmission cooler was removed and completely gutted out of this header, and there is no way knowing any of the cores are blocked from one side to the other. I was fortunate early on in the piece that another one of the viewers turned around and made a suggestion with the original setup, and we've done that, we've modified it. So here's our suction side of things. It goes basically parallel to the water pump now. So we've got area for another pipe to be put in here that will then go across to our original what do you call it, those water reservoir. So that's got a filler tube. It's also got another bleed tube there, and it has also the facility for another return, which will coincide with the return on top of the thermostat housing. And yeah, so it fits in there all nicely now. No complaints whatsoever. It's tight, and it's certainly getting tighter, but that's it. So that's basically a stock 4-litre aluminium radiator. It's running 3-core, and we've basically gutted out one side of it, got rid of the transmission cooler. We're going to run an external transmission cooler for the BDR. They're renowned for running hot, so we're not going to even bother trying to run it through the cooling system. And yeah, you have one outlet at the top to suit the outlet on the Barra, and the other one's been moved up to give you clearance, because behind here there's interference with the chassis, and right about here is the right spot for the water pump for the Barra. So as far as I'm concerned, I reckon it's turned out pretty good. Well, we're back on the Jeep, and we're onto the transmission. So as you've seen, we've welded up the cross member, we're setting up the pinion angle, and we're trying to button up everything to do with the drivetrain. So we've got our drive shaft. Did I say that right? Drive shaft for the front and the back. We've upgraded our universal joints. We've got some billet hardware in the rear end. What else have we done? We're onto the transmission cooling side of things. Heaps of stuff is going on. Just so that you guys know, basically what we're seeing here with the Jeep is a mock-up. This motor has to come out. So although it looks like it's complete and we're making progress forward, we're not really. It's just been mocked up. So pretty much everything that you see me fabricate has to come apart, engine has to come out, and then we have to put all new gaskets and bits and pieces through the motor, and then go through all the bullshit of putting it all back in again. So unfortunately that's just how it is. So hopefully we have this project all finished up soon enough. Righto, so this is my professionally made cross member, and I know it's professionally made because it's painted black. So anything painted black means it's professionally made. I think that's how it works in the car shows. Anywho, you can see that the BDR is sitting quite nicely. We've set our pinion angle. I'm not going to show you how to do that because that's not what I am about. That's my billet flange. This is only primarily in here just to get a test fit and make sure that my measurements were correct. I'll show you more about the drive shafts later on. This flange here in particular will be pulled out, and I've got to index it and put a series of magnets around it because the BDR transmission requires an input in order to change gears and know what speed it's doing. And I'm going to recreate the input that it might need from an ABS, which it would have had, by putting a series of holes in that flange that will be tapped, and I'll be putting magnets around the circumference of it, and hopefully that will be able to give the input that the computer or the ECU is looking for, so it can do its job, which is shifting gears. So I'm now onto the transmission cooler. The original hard lines from the Ford Territory won't fit the Jeep. Obviously the body lines inside the transmission tunnel are completely different. So I've cut these off the BDR transmission, and the idea is I was going to put a rubber flexible hose on the end of them. Now I don't want to just put the hose on and clamp it, so I've gone out and purchased some olives which will just sit on here, and the idea is they're a compression fitting. Normally they would be there would be a nut behind there and a tapered fitting on the inside, and as they're clamped up or tightened down, these swell around the pipe and become a permanent fixture. Now I can't do that here, but the idea is that I'm going to run a little bit of solder under each one, and that will help the clamp down in between the two olives, and it will reduce the chance of the hoses blowing off. So that way I can sort of retain a little bit of the Ford original factory banjo fittings, and then run my flexible line up to the transmission cooler, which we got from the wreckers, and yeah, hopefully it'll work and make installation a little bit easier. So I decided to braze it instead. I was having issues controlling the heat for a soft solder, so I just used a bit of flux, brazed it, as you could see in the previous footage, and that's what we've created. There's the profile. So hopefully our clamp will go here, and we'll push the hose on, and that will stop it from popping off, hopefully. Well, it's got a better chance of not popping off now than it did previously. So yeah, that's one cleaned up, and that's the one that I just brazed. A bit messy, but it'll clean up alright. It just looks really shit because of all the flux that's still on it. It'll come up just like this one, with a bit of a clean. So for the last few months the old transmission's been leaking fluid, obviously because we haven't had our pipes connected, so every time I've been jacking up the Jeep, transmission fluid's been leaking out and making a mess on the floor. But essentially you can see where our pipe work is. As I said, there's a, sorry about the camera work, but there's a little bit of a there's an O-ring in there which allows them to have a little bit of movement. And we've got one pipe here and another pipe there with our olives that we brazed on, and that should allow a little bit more strength to the way that we're going to attach the flexible rubber hose, and we're going to run that right up to the front, where we'll go down to the wreckers and pull out a second-hand transmission cooler from one of the old wrecks down there, and throw that up front and mock everything up and see where it's going to fit. Just down at the wreckers, so I think I'm going to pull this trans cooler out and use it on the Jeep, and hopefully it'll keep the temperatures of the old BDR under control. So I've just finished fabricating this bracket. The sole purpose of this bracket is to mount our intercooler to. There's not a lot of clearance in respect to fitting a decent sized intercooler here, so I fitted the biggest air-to-air intercooler that I could fit, with giving me the ground clearance that I needed. Now the other thing I'm going to do is to help complement the system is fit a water to meth injection kit, which I've got surplus sitting around. I'm going to install that under the bonnet later on, and that's going to help me get the intake temperatures down, and it also will allow me to be less reliant on my fuel. So I don't want to run E85 on this. I want to be able to go and drive anywhere around Victoria, Melbourne, and pretty much get my 98 fuel and not have to worry about planning where to go to fill up with E85. So the idea is this car will be on pump 98, and we're going to have the water meth and we're going to have the air-to-air intercooler, and hopefully that will keep our intake temperatures down, and we can get a little bit of reliability out of the motor in that respect. Panning down, awesome. Okay, so this is my bracket. As I said, you just need to run a straight edge off your pulleys to locate the distance, or to get the correct location of the alternator, and you can just basically utilize the holes that are already in the timing cover to locate the alternator on the AC side. So this is the side where the air conditioner was. Now the next thing you're going to have to do is, you can't just purely rely on that. You need to make a bracket, and you're going to be out of screen for a minute, and here we go. So we have a support bracket that comes all the way back, and it meets up at the back of the block here at a factory mounting point there for, I don't know, something. But anyway, we utilize that, and basically that gives the alternator more rigidity, so it's not going to flex with the tension that's put on it by the belt. So if you look at the previous videos where I showed you the parts made, it's not a really difficult item to make. The hardest thing you're going to make will be these spaces in here. You probably could try and do them, you could probably do them out of ground washers if they mount up correctly. I used the lathe, so I was able to get it more precise, but I guess if you needed to really jerry rig something and you didn't have a lathe as an option, or someone able to machine something for you, you could try and use washers as spacers, but I highly not recommend it. Okay, now the other thing that we turned around and we ended up finding a bit of an issue was FG sump, territory BDR. Basically, once you turn around and change the territory sump, you no longer have access to the converters. So you can't do the converter bolts. So you need to turn around and grind a hole. You can't sort of see it behind the starter motor, but they're in the sandwich plate back behind here. You need to grind away a relief so that you can put a socket in there and tighten up your converter bolt. Otherwise, if you don't do that, there's no way of tightening up your converters. So I used a carbide tip to do that, and pretty much just at the very last minute when I'd finished doing what I was doing, I decided to get a little bit anal and try and smooth things out a little bit more, and the carbide jumped out of the chuck and went down behind the converter. So lucky for me, I was able to use some super magnets stuck to the flywheel, and I turned the crank and it picked the carbide tip up, because otherwise there's no way of getting shit in and out of there. So that's one thing you need to consider when you're doing your swap, is if it's auto, how you're going to do your converter bolts up. Now, everyone kept asking me why I didn't drop the Barra down lower. Well, that's your answer there. That's your power steering box. That's a clearance for your pulley to maintain the correct orientation for your tensioner. So if you can figure out a way that basically retains the amount of coverage over the water pump pulley that the factory water pump needs, without that pulley, then you probably could lower it substantially. That is, until you hit the diff. I've made up new fittings and pipe work. They're all dash fittings and pipes to suit the Barra's power steering. And then we come down to the mounts, which a lot of people have been asking me about. So pretty much this is a DIY kit from Tough Mounts. I've been given permission directly to now tell everyone that yes, I am using Tough Mounts. I needed to get permission off them so I could use it on YouTube. So that's a Tough Mount DIY kit, and this is the original factory Jeep mount that's been cut, not cutted. And then we've got a bit of square. Now the square's been capped off and it's got a rod through it, so basically that's not hollow, it's been filled in. I don't know if I can get the camera down here to show you, but you can see in there that you can't see daylight through one end to the other, and that's what the engineer wanted. We've updated the yoke. We've now gone for a CV style slip joint yoke at the front. We've also upgraded our bolts. Our bolts have gone from 10.9 grade to a 12.9 grade bolt. So basically we're increasing the strength. We got rid of our, I'll try and show you here. This is the original Dana 30 style CV, not CV joint, but universal joint. It had these really tiny little bolts here that I was always concerned would be a weak spot. So I've upgraded with the drive shaft, which is a hybrid drive shaft, obviously with the all-wheel drive from the Territory, and we've gone to this style, which is what I was advised to go for. The guys I spoke to in the States are using Dana 30s with this style of setup and yoke, and they're running nitrous with I think it's 360 big blocks, and I think they hold the record as the quickest Jeep in the world at the moment, which is I'm not sure if it's in the 9s or low 9s, high 8s. So, and apparently they're doing it on a Dana 30, and they're doing it on a aluminium case rear end, which is, I think, I don't know what it is, it's the number, but one of you guys out there in the Jeeps would know exactly what I'm talking about. If we scroll around under the car, this is the yoke. You can see that the yoke now has magnets around it. The magnets are going to be provisions for an input for the speed sensor. We didn't go with the GPS, because if we don't get any GPS reception, then that basically means that the car will go in a limp home mode. So we've now got a billet yoke that goes to a slip joint down to the original Dana 35. And we know the Dana 35 is going to be the weak point, but for the time being, it's going to get the car on the road, which is what we're chasing. So thank you all for watching. This is the end of the first part of this series. I hope it's been informative. I hope you've actually learned something from it and it benefits you if you choose to put a Barra into a Jeep or something similar. I'm going to upload part 2, so look out for that. That should be somewhere around here. And enjoy that, and hopefully you get some more out of it. Stay tuned. Till next time, that's me, Anthony. Goodbye.